I'm Zach Walker. This is another episode of the DIU-ex podcast. I'm joined today by Richard Kuzma and Allison Lazarus talking about the Cambridge project. So how did you guys get involved in DIU, Richard and then Allison?
Yeah, sure. I'll start off. So I graduated from the Naval Academy in 2016. I spent some time in the Pentagon helping the Navy craft its unmanned systems policy, kind of a small UAS to large UAS. And from there, my first assignment was to go to the Harvard Kennedy School to get a master's in public policy. And at the same time, I had been kind of tracking what DIU was doing, was always trying to find a way to be involved. And then based on some previous work references and knowing some West Coast DIU-exers, was able to find my way to help out the Boston office right as it was getting off the ground and really help out with some of the exciting stuff that was going on there.
Right. And I came actually from the Senate Armed Services Committee. So I worked there in 2017 and 2018. And when I left, I was coming up to grad school in Boston and really wanted to stay involved with kind of the defense technology ecosystem. And I had gotten some exposure to DIU through my work at SASC. And so knew Mike McGinley and a few folks in the Boston office and reached out to see how I could get involved.
That's great. And so I know, Allison, you're involved in what has come to be known as the Cambridge project now. Could you speak a bit more about how it works, how it came to be?
Yeah, absolutely. And the Cambridge project has many, many owners or many mothers or fathers. So, I'll speak a little bit about what it's like, but we should absolutely get Richard too. So the Cambridge project really is kind of a way for DIU to leverage the academic talent that's in the Boston ecosystem. So Boston is this amazing city in terms of technology, but it's also an amazing city in that it has world-class universities all over the place with grad students who are studying very different things, but who ultimately can really be helpful to DIU's mission. So what the Cambridge project does is it's a way for graduate students who are interested in defense technology to get engaged with DIU. So we form multidisciplinary, multi-service often teams of graduate students who are largely vets or active duty to look at problems of interest to DIU. And so each of those teams is kind of formed around a problem statement that comes from one of the DIU portfolios. And they spend a semester or a year working closely with a DIU person to kind of add value and actually dig in on the topic that they've been assigned.
That's great.
That's the 10,000-foot version of it.
Yeah, we'll get much closer to the surface. So Richard, can you set the scene, go back to DIU-ex 2.0 launch in Boston and this unprecedented opportunity to just do something different?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Allison mentioned, we're in such a rich academic ecosystem within Boston, as well as the tech ecosystem beyond that. So we saw this as a huge opportunity, but also recognized some of the constraints that DIU is under, and particularly the Boston office. So although DIU gets a lot of press for all the great work it's done, and we've had some pretty amazing projects come through, it's actually a pretty small outfit. I think we were operating with less than 50 people across both coasts and Austin at one point, and a pretty small budget. So, but sometimes those constraints can lead to innovation in new ways, I suppose. So we looked around and saw that there were so many graduate students, both active duty and veterans, who deeply understood DoD problems because they had just come from the force, but also were getting these incredible educations, really touching some cutting edge technology, the latest research from professors. And we knew there had to be a way to kind of mold those two together. And I think that hopefully we saw the immediate impact of bringing students in to help out, but also the long-term potential of creating more tech evangelists within DoD.
Okay. And very cost effective. If someone's on active duty, it's quite cost effective.
Extremely.
Absolutely. And it was amazing. We saw just everyone was so willing to jump in because I think so many people who serve in uniform and even out of uniform really have that hunger to help out constantly. And if you took them away from the front lines or whatever their deployment was, they still wanted to use their skills to make a difference. And DIU was a great place to do that.
Yeah, I would say I was constantly shocked. Like I always assumed a big part of the Cambridge Project job would be recruiting. And in fact, that was one of the easiest parts because you'd have tons of, dozens of students every year who, like Richard and I, were coming to Boston and had heard about DIU and were excited to help out. So that was always actually a really easy portion of this to find the students that were interested.
Yeah. And what schools have Cambridge Project worked with so far?
So we've got Harvard, MIT, and Tufts are the big ones that we've worked with so far. And that's across graduate schools for each one. So we've done things with the policy schools at each one of those, the engineering and the business schools. And we're hoping also to work with the law schools. Haven't managed to get any of them in the door yet, but have really tried to kind of get a diverse cast of characters from those schools, not just picking from one grad school.
At least for me, one of the first thoughts was, well, it's academia, right? I mean, DIU is accelerating commercial technology for national security. Academia, that's what DARPA does. That's what the research labs do. And I just want to make sure I dispel the rumor. Like you guys aren't in the labs necessarily looking at, TRL2 technology, right? You're still doing commercial technology and doing diligence, just using people at institutions, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think, the disciplines, we often attract, for instance, a lot of business school students who are like, never want to get near the labs whatsoever. And in fact, the only reason they're excited about this is because it's all commercial technology and they want to go talk to the startups and the VCs and actually like deal with products that exist right now. I think, we definitely, there's definitely still an academic component. Like we stay really looped up with the professors at each of these institutions who have been really supportive. But all of the kind of driving force behind problems that we choose are that they're actually of substance and interesting to the DIU portfolios, as opposed to being something that's kind of 5 years out and not interesting to anyone and just going to be put on a shelf.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Richard, could you talk a bit more about kind of that quick wins, immediate wins for DIU to do this, and then maybe some of the more long-term reasons for having this?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you both know, DIU is extremely problem-driven, but you don't always have the ability to get the perspective of a warfighter sitting down right next to you. We luckily are able to do that in a lot of cases and do a lot of defense engagement. But it was awesome to bring in, a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force who's been a squadron commander and say, hey, I experienced this exact problem. Here's a little bit more depth on that. And then you paired them with a HBS student at the Harvard Business School, for instance, who said, oh, I understand the market really well on this, or I can connect us to some of the venture capital firms in and around Boston. And I think by bringing these different skill sets together, it really helped DIU to apply more brain power in a cross-functional way to the immediate problems that we're facing, because a lot of the problems we were going after at that time had that pretty quick 6, 12, 18-month turnaround. So it was great to have that fresh operational experience, but also that fresh industry and academia experience as well. I think part of DIU's long-term mission is changing the overall innovation culture and the technology acquisition culture in DoD. And, there may be one day when DIU doesn't exist because throughout the military, we use these new authorities that DIU often leverages. We move as quick as possible. We have these deep ties with industry. And so I think it really fit DIU's long-term mission of showing operational leaders, right? These company commanders, squadron commanders, shift commanders, who had been pegged as leaders and superstars within their respective service, how the Defense Innovation Unit and other acquisition mechanisms could solve their real immediate problems with technology, take that knowledge back out to the force so that the next time a problem came up, they knew who to call back to at DIU, and they knew the mechanisms and the pathways with which to solve those problems.
Yeah, and you were one of those folks, right? As a DIU-ex, you left DIU-ex and went off to the force, and of course now you're back on this podcast. But what was it like for you to go through this and then go out to the force?
It was great. I think it really opened my eyes to the entire defense ecosystem, and also the understanding that there were a lot of people behind the scenes working on the technology solutions to problems. And I actually work with DIU in my current role at the Army's AI Task Force. I lead talent management portfolio efforts. So how can we put the right people in the right place at the right time? And I know that's been something that Mike McGinley has been thinking about for a long time. And there's been a really great synergy throughout, what AITF is doing and what DIU can offer, and we can attack problems through different viewpoints and through different mechanisms.
That's great. And Allison, I know one of your past jobs was on the Senate Armed Services Committee, certainly a key stakeholder for anyone that wants to spend taxpayer money. If you offer that perspective on from the congressional side, what it looks like to have an organization like DIU leverage active duty service members and others to really drive home these things.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, when it comes down to it, I think the Richard put it really well, that kind of maybe scarcity of resources creates real drive toward creativity. And I think that ability of DIUs to leverage the resources that it has available to it in a really creative way, as opposed to just thinking of, how do we use the 10 bills we have? It's kind of how do we use this whole ecosystem that we're part of, is something that as congressional oversight, you always want to see, and you kind of fairly rarely see, I think, within elements of DoD who just, sometimes don't have kind of the ecosystem to be able to pull from like this. So I think definitely, my time on the Hill, I definitely didn't have the kind of understanding of the problems that DIU is dealing with, and kind of the immediacy of the problems. And so the Cambridge project, at least for me, has been a really educational experience, also to get a better sense of kind of what was going on the other side of the curtain.
Definitely. Yeah, it's a lot of playing Moneyball in DIU, trying to get the best bang for the few bucks. So, this is the DIU-ex podcast. We want to ask hard questions, right? So I have a list of things that you've done in the past in the Cambridge project, and I'm going to find out. I'm going to ask you what came out of it, or were they just reports that went nowhere, right? It's time for the hard questions, right? So I have a list, right? We looked at 2018, hypersonics, space, human performance, ally adversary innovation, tactical power, and then of course 2019 is autonomy and artificial intelligence. So what happened? Were they just some PowerPoint briefs and then everyone scattered to the wind, or what came out of it?
So I can talk about this a little bit if that's helpful. I think for the kind of DIU side, I all of those problems were not just like born out of our heads, right? Those were all things that we actually solicited from the portfolios, that they wanted real people to be working on. So I hope kind of at the most basic level, these were things that were helpful to the portfolios themselves. But we also had at least a few of those projects that kind of went a little bit further than DIU. So the tactical power team was brief, joined some people within DIU that were speaking to SOCOM soon after, and kind of informed some of the work that they were doing with SOCOM. There was also kind of some interaction with DARPA that came out of the human performance meeting. And I think that, the impact is definitely kind of manpower and extra hands, hopefully, to help the portfolios get somewhere on the DIU side. But I think it's also kind of, like Richard's saying, the exposure to DIU that came out of having 30 people up as part of those teams that semester or whatever it was, I think hopefully spread kind of DIU's gospel pretty far among those participants, whether they're still in the force or whether they've kind of dispersed out to the private sector. So hopefully that answers your question. I think there's a little bit of impact on both sides, though definitely this is something, like any organization, that we can strive to have more impact every time that we run this. Yeah,
it certainly seems that way. So having seen the most recent one that the team put on, it was very impressive to see the recommendations, and really, in a sense, kind of like being a thought leader for the Department of Defense with some of the recommendations that they proposed to SecDef. That's the hope, and that's the hope. Yeah. So what is the future of the? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So didn't DIU also just officially launch its tactical power and energy portfolio as well? So I'd imagine maybe there was some overlap in that, Cambridge project helping figure out, was this the right direction for DIU, and maybe how best to pursue that. Although I could be wrong, I could be outdated there.
Yeah, there was a big power and energy event back in 2018. So it looks like it overlaps with the time that the Cambridge project was looking at it. And I know that is one of the big reasons, one of the big drivers that led to us establishing a focus in that area. That's a good one too. That's great. That's good too. The wins just keep coming. So what is the future of the Cambridge project? And I understand the National Security Innovation Network, NSIN, is part of DIU. It seems like some natural area for some cross-contamination. That's exactly right. So, NSIN has a really strong portfolio of programs, a lot of which kind of are focused on education and tapping into the educational ecosystem. Cambridge Project is going to kind of become part of the X-Force Capstone program, which is already very similar to Cambridge Project in that it kind of looks at hard problems with some oversight
from schools and from professors that are nearby. And so we're going to be able to, leverage the great talents of Matt Marigi, who's the new Ensign Northeast director, and Dana Sanford, who's the X-Force Capstone director, to really kind of improve and narrow down our problem statements, to really get to problems that are true kind of priorities that have to happen now, and kind of double down on the impact that we're able to have, to your point, Zach. So we're really, I think, excited about that transition, and what it'll mean for what this year looks like.
Yeah, and having two DoD organizations working together collaboratively instead of doing their own thing, I feel like that's something that people like perhaps on the Hill always want to see, right?
Yes,
not a bad
absolutely. And I think this is a really natural place for the program to live, and I think it'll be fun to see what develops.
So Richard, you were really involved in the early parts of setting up the Cambridge project. How did it all come together? What were some of the partnerships? Just having a DIU office probably wasn't enough.
Absolutely. So even though we were in the middle of the Boston University ecosystem, and Harvard, MIT, and Tufts were right there, you still have to build those bridges and make those connections. And we were extremely fortunate that at the Harvard Kennedy School, Secretary Ash Carter and Eric Rosenbach, who was his chief of staff, and part of kind of the group that founded DIU way back when, were very excited to support in any way possible. So we were able to kind of build that first bridge with them. Also, Josh Krieger and Mitchell Weiss over at the Harvard Business School, Professor Richard Schultz at the Fletcher School, who was able to get into not only the kind of 03, those mid-grade students, but also some of the more senior fellows, and then Fiona Murray and Phil Budden, both at MIT. So a lot of people to thank. Like Allison said, this program has many mothers, many fathers, and it really took a lot of work, not only from inside the DoD and from the students, but from the universities as well, to make this possible and support the students.
Yeah, it sounds like it was a huge team effort. Well, actually, you mentioned Dr. Ash Carter. See, to Austin, the third DIU and a great national tech hub. Keep up the good work, Ash Carter. So with his words and spirit being summoned here, could this come to Austin? Could you have an Austin project or a Silicon Valley project or a Dayton, Ohio project? I mean, what would some of the considerations be in recreating this tremendous success across the nation?
You go ahead, Allison. You've been living it every day.
I'm gonna stutter. No, I will go. But I want to say first, you're very kind to call us a tremendous success. I think we're a growing program that's, looking to add value and looking to get better. So I think we've improved kind of every semester, but we're still very much growing thanks to a lot of those people Richard mentioned. I think that you could do this in different places around the nation. I think the enthusiasm about these problems is way more widespread than I think a lot of people think. And I also think that kind of the impact that kind of excited young people can have on these problems is huge. I think that the limiting factor, what you really need, is what Richard talked about, is just the investment of time in building the relationships with these other institutions. It's not something that I think you can kind of just walk in off the street and say, great, would love to, take 10 hours of your time this semester and take your students and, it'll be great. Don't worry about it. And I think really that work that Richard and really Mike McGinley have done for years has put the Boston office in kind of the position where that can happen.
Yeah, and I think to add to what Allison was saying, the Mountain View office has actually been doing this in a bit of an ad hoc way already. So I think Zach, you already interviewed Tom Lester, who was at Stanford when he was a Navy JO working in the space portfolio. I know of others at Stanford who were working with Rogue Squadron, working on business development, and I think there are also some ties to Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey. So it's not that this can't be done. In fact, it already is. I think creating the Cambridge project was a way to open up that funnel and create more institutional support to ease some of the frictions, both on DIU side and also on the graduate student side of getting in and finding ways to help. So we're just trying to accelerate that process.
Yeah, and certainly with COVID and the new normal of being remote and teleworking, and even next semester, although this in 10 years will seem like a very dated episode, but at least as of July 2020, many universities, including MIT, Harvard, they're not having classes in person. in the fall. And that is just such a huge change to the entire experience. And I am curious to see how we can tap into that. There's the many active duty folks and others that are DoD affiliates that want to help and want to get involved that maybe aren't in Boston or Austin or Mountain View. Seems like it could be a tremendous opportunity to grow that base.
Absolutely. I think there's so much energy within students and within folks within the military that want to help out. And if DIU can create the mechanism or continue the mechanism that Allison's really built out to allow that, I think there's, sky's the limit.
What would be some advice that you would share with DIU as we approach our 5th anniversary? Pretty remarkable history, but hopefully best is yet to come. Based on what you've learned with Cambridge Project and other things, what would you share with us? What could we do better?
Maybe this is self-serving and not going much beyond the stated mission of DIU, but I do think the Cambridge Project, if it's done anything, has proved out the value of engaging with the community outside of DoD. And I think even defining the community more broadly sometimes than DIU does. So it's more than the commercial enterprises, it's more than the startups that are just surrounding defense. I think it's, how can DIU think as creatively about places like universities as it does about the commercial marketplace, and really tap into, I think, the really wide population that's eager to help on these kinds of problems.
Yeah, to add, I'd say, keep pushing and keep telling the stories. I know it's easy to look back and see all the amazing work that DIU has done, but I think being inside, it's easy to forget how much of a slog it sometimes can feel in the day-to-day. And like we mentioned with the tactical power and energy, that idea started bubbling up around 2018. It took 2 years for that to become a portfolio. I think with the Cambridge Project, we never imagined it would grow and really catch on the way it did. So those things, and now seeing a lot of the other projects catch on with the services and really grow and blossom, not only from the original customer, but in more of a joint way. I think just keep pushing, keep telling the stories and the narratives that show people what can be done if you are able to, fight with and for the system.
That's great. Anything we missed?
I think actually that the only thing I would say is just I think we should at some point kind of thank Mike McGinley and also thank all the PMs and others within DIU who have put in the time to work with some of these teams, because, we talked about kind of impact being two ways, that there's, impact hopefully helping DIU, and then there's also impact on the students. And I think that this project has been successful because of the hours that, in addition to their day jobs, that a lot of people put into the organization. Like you, when you came and briefed about Voltron to all the Cambridge Project people, I think these are all extra obligations, and I think it really shows a lot about DIU that we've managed to get the investment from as many people as we have in the Cambridge Project. So just really want to say thank you to everybody who's helped even tangentially.
I don't think that we could overstate just what an incredible impact Mike McGinley had in driving this and enabling us to, further enable these students. And I think really the openness and the willingness of PMs and really the entire DIU enterprise to accept the students and say, hey, there's a great value add to be had here, and there is a big return on investment for the DoD, for DIU, and for the students. And we talked about the constraints DIU is under. There's so much great work to be done and only so many hours in the day. And people at DIU found a way to support and really step up and give their time and their mentorship. And you can't thank them enough.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you for what you both did to get this Cambridge Project off the ground, in addition to everything else that you did for DIU and DoD. And thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.